Welcome to American History Lesson 19. World War I. Our lesson objectives are: identify and describe the factors that led to the outbreak of World War I, describe the terms nationalism, imperialism, militarism, alliance, describe the causes and effects of World War I on the United States of America. The battle lines are drawn. 4 factors contributed to the outbreak of World War I in Europe: nationalism, anger grew as nations pursued only their own interests; imperialism, rivalries increased as nations competed for power around the world; militarism, the nations developed strong, proud, armed forces to back up their growing empires; alliances, a series of treaties grouped the nations of Europe into 2 armed camps. World War I broke out in 1914 when a Serbian killed the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. Russia then defended Serbia against Austria-Hungary when they reacted to the assassination. Germany supported Austria-Hungary by declaring war on France, who at that time was Russia's ally. Soon after, Great Britain, who was France's ally, retaliated by declaring war on Germany. Armies opposed each other across a system of trenches across Europe. Many soldiers gave their lives in this war, but neither side gained territory. At this time, the United States refused to align themselves with either side. Because America had strong economic ties with Great Britain and France, and because stories of the German atrocities became known, Americans began supporting the Allied countries. A blockade was formed to prevent food and fertilizer from reaching Germany. Because the Germans were starving, Germany fought back with submarine attacks on ships going to Great Britain. Americans were outraged when Americans died in these attacks. Even so, President Wilson resisted against entering the war. He was re-elected with the slogan, "He kept us out of war." In January of 1917, Wilson suggested a peace agreement between the warring powers. Germany responded by continuing the submarine attacks and began targeting American ships. With few other options, Wilson requested that Congress declare war on Germany, and Congress did so on April 6, 1917. The United States enters World War I. Although the United States was not prepared for war, it launched a draft and put about 3 million men in uniform. Women were not drafted, but accepted as volunteers by the Navy to serve as nurses and secretaries. African Americans served, and some were trained as officers, but they served in separate units. The United States government increased the amount of shipping available to transport soldiers and supplies to Europe. The United States and Great Britain began sending merchant ships in large convoys guarded by naval warships. This helped reduce the number of ships lost to submarine attacks by the Germans. In the beginning of American involvement, American soldiers were divided among other armies of the Allies, replacing men that were killed or wounded in those armies. Then American General John J. Pershing decided that the American army should fight the war as its own army. The American troops were better able to fight the Germans in major attacks because they were less tired than the Allied troops, who were weary from years of warfare. The Germans, too, were becoming weak and running low on supplies. Technological advances in weaponry made it possible to cause much more destruction in World War I. Machine guns, tanks, and gas warfare were killing larger numbers of soldiers than in past wars. Both sides began using warplanes, but the technology was still limited. As in most wars, soldiers suffered from disease and hardship. Fun fact: tanks were originally called land ships. The British were the first to call them tanks, hoping to mask their true purpose. Tanks were also said to have genders, with tanks with cannons being male and tanks with machine guns being female. The British were the first to employ tanks in World War I at the Battle of Flers-Courcelette in September 1916. In total, approximately 48,000 American soldiers died in combat, and another 62,000 died from disease. In November of 1918, all of Germany, including sailors, soldiers, and civilians, rebelled against the government and refused to continue fighting the war. The German Kaiser surrendered his throne, and then the newly formed government surrendered to the Allies. World War I and its impact on America's shores. The United States mobilized industry and labor as well as soldiers. Wilson named Bernard M. Baruch as the head of the War Industries Board, WIB, which was the agency responsible for overseeing industrial production. This helped increase American industrial output by 20%. However, this caused an increase in the prices of goods. While some industries such as metalwork, shipbuilding, and meatpacking boomed, Americans were suffering from the effects of higher prices. Union membership increased greatly during this time. The Food Administration asked people to change their eating habits to save food for soldiers. The cost of the war was paid by raising taxes and by selling war bonds. Celebrities helped in this by helping to sell bonds through endorsements and commercials. The Committee of Public Information supported the war effort by encouraging people to donate certain supplies and rationing some commodities themselves. Because of the war, there was an anti-German backlash discrediting German products or people of German background. The Espionage and Sedition Acts were passed, making it illegal to interfere with the military draft, the sale of war bonds, or say anything that could be defined as disloyal. Approximately 1,500 people were convicted under these acts. The main targets were socialists and union leaders. African American leaders were divided over supporting the war. There were those who believed that helping the war effort would help the fight for racial equality. Still others said that without equality, African Americans should not engage in the war. One result of the war on African Americans was the Great Migration, which was the movement of thousands of African Americans from the South to the northern cities. They hoped to escape harsh treatment in the South and find jobs and equality in the North. Women took jobs that had been performed by men in the past. Their contribution increased support for women's suffrage and ensured ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which granted women the right to vote. In addition, nearly 500,000 Americans died in a worldwide flu epidemic of 1919. To read more about the Great Pandemic, click on the link below. The politics post-World War I. President Wilson traveled to Europe to encourage a peace plan called the 14 Points, which he believed would prevent future wars. He thought by eliminating secret treaties and reducing imperialism, the causes of these wars would be reduced. Some of the points included specific adjustments to national boundaries. Wilson's goal was to allow the various and diverse ethnic groups to determine their own fate. It was during this era that Wilson proposed creating the League of Nations, which was an international organization allowing nations a platform to discuss and settle their disputes without resorting to war. Wilson was not able to win his points. The war victors, Great Britain, France, and Italy, were intent on punishing Germany for the war. The Treaty of Versailles initially established a peace and created 9 new nations in Europe, parts of the Ottoman Empire, which had allied with Germany to create temporary British and French colonies in the Middle East. Germany's army and navy were dissolved, and Germany was forced to pay war damages to the victors. In addition, Germany had to admit to guilt for causing the war. The treaty had 3 main weaknesses. The harsh treatment of Germany weakened Germany's economy and created resentment. The treaty ignored new communist governments in Russia. It did not recognize nationalist desires in the colonies of European powers. Many Americans believed the treaty was unjust and imperfect. Americans debated the League of Nations provision contained in the treaty. Many thought that joining the League would lead to the American involvement in foreign conflicts. Wilson would not compromise on the League or accept amendments to the treaty proposed by Republican leaders. The treaty was not ratified by the Senate, and the United States never joined the League of Nations. By the 1920s, Germany was bankrupt and upset over their country's harsh treatment under the treaty. The Germans searched for someone to blame for Germany's economic hardships. During this time, Adolf Hitler and his anti-Jewish sentiments were able to rise and thrive in Germany. What next? Take the time to go back and review the lesson on your own. After your review, complete the lesson review for the lesson and submit for grading. Remember, your submission should follow all the rules for standard written English. All submissions must be written in your own words and sources used cited at the end. How to cite sources in APA format. When you reference a source within an APA-style paper, whether it is using a direct quote, repurposing an image, or simply referring to an idea or theory, you should insert an in-text citation, the author's surname and the date of publication within parentheses, straight after a direct quote. CitationMachine.net will assist you in creating citations.